Hello, my name is Andrew Charles Edwards, and I lead the Wireless Services Business Unit at ICF Next. We're a proud Tier 1 SMS aggregator and a long-standing partner of the CWTA. It's my pleasure today to announce our moderator for the 5G panel. Eric Smith is the VP of Regulatory Affairs at the CWTA and also leads their 5G Council, which I've been very fortunate enough to participate in. Today, he's going to be talking to us about, he's going to be leading a discussion in the effective rollout in 5G networks in Canada. He has a wealth of experience in this field. Eric was the head of BlackBerry government relations for Canada, as well as their Division General Counsel. So we certainly have an expert here today to talk to us about this incredible new technology and what the implications are for Canada. If you do get a chance to talk to Eric, talk to him about his gorgeous dog named Finnegan, who is a fabulous Irish setter. It's my pleasure to introduce Eric to the stage.
Thanks a lot. Anywhere you like. Oh, good morning, everyone. I see the clock is already starting to run on us, so it's kind of like basketball. The shot clock is on us, and haven't even got the ball yet, but we're going to get started. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I want to talk just a little bit, tiny little bit about CWTA. A lot of you will know CWTA. A lot of you are members or have interacted with us. But a lot of you probably don't know everything that we do. And Andrew had mentioned the 5G Canada Council, and I'll touch on that in a second. But you know, like many industry organizations, a big part of what we do is advocacy with government of all levels. Public policy issues, et cetera. But we also administer a lot of different programs, really, to bring services to Canadians on behalf of our members and on our own behalf. So we do things like Recycle My Cell. So we run stewardship programs in different provinces for people to be able to recycle their devices. The Common Short Code program, Mobile Giving Canada, so work with charities to allow people to text to donate to charities. We work on issues with regulators around 911, accessibility issues, so the different communities that people, could be the deaf, hard of hearing, et cetera, people, and helping make sure that they have accessibility to wireless services. We also have a council called STAC, which is Structures, Towers, and Antennas Council, which has really grown over the past couple of years, where we work with both CWT members and other companies that are involved in the tower and antenna business with a real heavy focus on workplace safety. And also, as was mentioned, 5G Canada Council. Every year we've been putting on a conference in Ottawa. It's free. Our goals and objectives with that conference is we want to have a good dialogue between policymakers, bureaucrats, and industry to make sure we're talking about 5G, what's coming down the road, and make sure that people have a good understanding of the issues. Hope that you'll look out for an announcement of when we will have our next conference. It may not be in January next year because we've got an election this fall. We'll have a government coming in, a new parliament rising. There's a little CRTC hearing thing going on in January too we may be involved in. So it's to be determined when that will be. Well, we invite you to look at our website or our 5gcc.ca website. We also have an interesting, we put out economic reports as well around 5G, and we'll be having a new one coming out this summer, so it's a good place to look for that as well. So today, our panel, we're going to talk about 5G. You may have heard 5G come up a few times already, so it's an interesting challenge sometimes to have a panel on a subject that comes up in every panel. And we don't want to just duplicate things. Thankfully, the title of our panel is in the form of a question. And so we thought, maybe answering that question would be a good place to start. The title of the panel is 5G Evolution or Revolution. And when I started, I got that assignment, I did what any deep thinker does. I Googled, is 5G an evolution or a revolution? It's amazing what it comes up with. And you know, I saw headlines like 5G will be as revolutionary as electricity or the automobile. I also saw 5G, don't believe the hype. I also saw 5G as a CIA plot. We tried to get someone from the CIA on the panel, but they were a little tight-lipped and they didn't want to discuss it. So we've got a great panelists here with us to discuss this. So I'm just going to ask them to introduce themselves. And those of you, especially Ian and Sean, who come from companies that maybe people aren't as familiar with, you can talk just a little bit about your company and what you do as well. And so we'll just start with Ian.
So, thank you very much. So I'm Ian Fogg. I'm VP Analysis at Opensignal. We're a mobile analytics company. We measure the real-world experience of consumers on smartphones in Canada and around the world. So that's things like download speed, the experience of watching video, latency, and various other metrics. And we rank Canada very highly compared to other countries around the world. More of that in a minute.
Thank you. Yeah, so my name's Sean Newman. I look after product management for a company called Corero, and we specialize in real-time automatic DDoS protection. We sell predominantly to service and hosting providers, and we do sell to some enterprises as well. Yeah, we're kind of here today to kind of put my perspective on what that means from 5G. So, thank you.
Hi, morning everybody. I'm Alexander Brock. I'm the Senior Vice President of Technology Strategy, Innovation and Partnerships at Rogers. So essentially I look at all of the long-range technology strategy for both our cable operation, our Rogers for Business operation, and our wireless. And I also look at the technology strategy for IT as well. Morning.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anoop Kulkarni. I'm from Nokia, and I'm the global head of 5G network cognitive services sales for Nokia. What that means is Nokia is obviously a big organization, and my goal is to work with our service providers globally, understand how we can help them to deploy 5G in the most effective and efficient manner. And also I work with some service providers who are not quite ready to deploy 5G, and we help them to identify strategies to manage their network capacity, congestion, et cetera, until 5G is there for them. So that's effectively what we do.
Great. Well, thanks for that, everyone. And I do want to note as well, we were to have a fifth panelist you may have seen in your program, Brian O'Shaughnessy from Shaw. Unfortunately, Brian was under the weather and is not able to join us, which is too bad. I've sat on panels with him as well, and he always gives a great perspective on the Canadian market. So the question that we were given, or was posed to us, is evolution or revolution, or maybe it's a bit of both. So we thought we'd start just with everyone giving a bit of their perspective really on in what ways should people think of 5G as an evolution of what comes before. And we'll just start and we'll just go down the line. Yeah.
Sure. So I think a lot depends on the timing. I think you mentioned in the introduction there's discussion about too much hype on 5G and other people saying it'll be as transformational as electricity. And I think you have to think about the timing. 5G isn't going to be with us just for 1 or 2 years, it'll be with us for 10 or 20 years. The initial deployments of 5G that we read about in the newspapers, in Korea, in the US, in the UK, in Australia, and Switzerland, are really very early versions of this technology. And they're really focused on improving the smartphone user experience and perhaps some fixed wireless access as well. In Opensignal's data, we can see that the maximum speeds people are getting vary by country, as much as sort of 1.2 gigabits on Verizon in the US, up to the high hundreds, or about 800, 900 megabits in Korea in our data at the moment. But it's very early days. These are very early services. The technology is very mature. So that's why we're hearing people say it's evolution, it's overhyped. But if you think ahead, you think beyond that to the later releases of 5G that are being planned with a 5G core with much lower latencies, much more reliability, that opens up many other opportunities for service providers, for the mobile industry that could be completely revolutionary compared to what we see today.
So from a security perspective?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was going to make this sort of similar observation. I think as someone who's more of a security guy than an expert in 5G networks, it feels more like it's potentially an evolution that's going to lead to a revolution. I think I've heard it at many of the sessions here over the last day or so. It feels like there's been initial rollouts. I'm based in the UK. The British Telecom turned on their initial 5G service last week, and you can see that's got a few teething troubles. It's got a bit of a way to go. We've heard in some of the sessions here that the technology is still evolving and won't be fully deployed at its maximum potential for another 2, maybe 3 years, and then some of the applications that are going to be able to build on that, the old low latency applications that you mentioned, I think that's when we might start to see the revolution side of things. But at the moment, it feels like an evolution, but in a good way. My 12-year-old son, he spends his whole time on YouTube on his phone. He lives looking at his phone all the time, and he's kind of lived in a 4G era, I guess, and that's served him really well. If we think back to 3G, that kind of made mobile data just about usable from a browser perspective. You get to 4G, you can stream YouTube videos or Netflix on your phone at perfectly good quality. But if you then get into a busy area, no built-up town or whatever, you have issues with, you have signal, but then you don't have the data coverage. So it feels like those are the things that 5G is going to address in the near term that are going to make people like my 12-year-old son really happy that he's always going to get his connectivity. And then those applications that are going to enable whatever it is, autonomous vehicles or health applications are really then going to build on that once the full deployment is out.
Thank you. So Alexander, on the evolution question, in what ways should we think of it as an evolution of 4G?
So I certainly agree with all the previous comments that were made, but I think our view is that 5G is an evolution that leads to revolution. 5G is, builds on a solid foundation from 4.5G. And it's going to be that way for several years, is so that the foundation of a good 5G network is a good 4.5G network. And 4.5G is going to be around for a very long time as well. So the evolutionary part about it is that a lot of the capabilities that we'd like to do in 4.5G aren't either possible or not particularly efficient in terms of what we can do, and the costs. Everybody's requirements grow year on year, and so those data requirements have to be met, and the cost per bit carried is going to have to come down if we're going to meet those requirements. And a lot of 5G is about that, but it isn't just about speed. It's all about all those other capabilities that are inherent in what the 5G specifications were designed to do, whether it be latency, whether it be massive connectivity in an area, etc. So the evolutionary part is what we're seeing today. It's very early days in terms of 5G. People, it's where we are is really trial deployments. If it works, it's a deployment. If it doesn't work, it's a trial. So that's where people are today. A lot of good work is being done. A lot of frequency is being released. A lot of technical analysis and figuring out what works and what doesn't is being done right now. So it's very much an evolution on a solid 4.5G. It builds on a lot of those capabilities. It's designed to work with 4.5G. Dynamic spectrum sharing is going to be a game changer for the industry and the ability to share a spectrum between 4.5G and 5G networks for the first time. It's a massive change for the industry and is going to be revolutionary. But that's a linkage between 4.5G and 5G. So
in a way, that's very different to the 3G to 4G transition.
Absolutely.
Because one of the things that we're seeing with the initial 5G deployments is your device will connect to a 5G band alongside the 4G band. So it is that straight, there's no sort of case of either or, and dynamic spectrum shows another example of that. It's both, where before we had that transition from 2G to 3G, there were the pains of a handover and things failing, and you connected to one or the other, and we had similar pain from 3G to 4G. This is designed to be much more intertwined, I would say.
not every network's so painful, but anyway.
Well, yeah. I'm from Europe.
I was just thinking
yeah, so,
when you, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I agree that it's a mix. It's both. I think although I would bank more on the revolution side, but definitely there are very, as everyone's pointed out, there are many aspects, such as the evolution from LTE Advanced to 5G, which is very much evolution. The other thing that's an evolution is the non-standalone mode of 5G, where 5G can ride on a 4G core. So that's very, 4G and 5G playing very well together, and you don't even have to roll out a 5G core. You could just reuse your existing core. And then some of the 5G use cases, which are very commonly being deployed by many of the operators, such as fixed wireless. Fixed wireless is a very evolutionary use case because fixed wireless has been around for many years. And it's not, 5G is giving it new life, but it's not necessarily that it's a, you can't claim that fixed wireless is a revolution. So those are the aspects that are evolutionary, but there's many other aspects that are more revolutionary that
well,
we can.
Let's get into some of those. I mean,
Okay.
I think that part of the problem, I think, is, for the the layperson, which I consider myself, just a layperson in this area, is most people just sort of see a few headlines, a few news stories, and they always trot out the things like autonomous vehicles and remote surgery and things like that.
Right.
So let's get beyond those things, and let's talk about whether it's just in terms of the network architecture or whether it's use cases or what have you. In what ways do you think of 5G as revolutionary? We're just going to go in reverse order, so we'll just start with it.
I agree. So the thing with the use cases for 5G and the fourth industrial revolution, they're not all going to come at the same time, right? So some of them are coming earlier, some are coming later. So let's talk about some of the use cases that are coming early, which we could say are a revolution. So one of our customers is a car manufacturer, and they want to flash the infotainment system on the car assembly lines when the cars are moving, right? So if you use 4G, the amount of data that you have to move when the cars are moving fast through an assembly line is just very difficult to do. But with 5G, it can be done. Another example, a lot of, let's say in Canada, mining is a huge activity, and a lot of mining companies are looking to deploy remote-controlled operations for many reasons, for reducing costs, OpEx, or health and safety reasons, et cetera. So 5G is what will enable you to do the remote control. What happens with remote control, you've got a tremendous amount of data coming on the uplink, and you've got a little bit of data going on the downlink to control the vehicle, but you have capturing very high-resolution video on the uplink. And you're getting it from all sides. So the amount of bandwidth and once you have to make a change to the navigation of the vehicle, the latency aspect of 5G is very key in enabling that use case. So these use cases exist in warehousing. If you, increasingly there is deployment of robots in warehousing, and those are real use cases that many customers are looking at today. And that 5G, they're effectively, 5G is to them, they waited out 4G because 4G really didn't offer them enough to switch from Wi-Fi. So they kind of stuck to Wi-Fi for whatever, for better or worse. But they're really looking for 5G to make that switch. And these customers don't invest, as often. So once they lock into a technology, they want that technology to work for the next 10, 15 years. So that's what 5G represents to them.
That's great. Thanks. Alexander?
So the evolutionary part, 5G is not another G. It isn't. It builds on it, but it really isn't. It was, a clean sheet of paper that people drew on in terms of, okay, what do we want wireless to be able to do that we've never been able to do before? Inside a building, outside a building, in the wide area, in your pocket, on the shop floor, wherever it is, down a mine. And that really was very much at the heart of what was designed in the specifications. And so the use cases are built on a set of real capabilities, whether it be latency, which is something that people have been chasing for a long time. Once you can get below 20 milliseconds, a whole pile of new use cases suddenly show up in terms of ultra-low latency, and all the way down to sub 10 milliseconds. Opens up a whole new set of vistas in terms of capabilities that we've never been able to do in wireless before. The idea of being able to connect 1 million devices per square kilometer, not going to happen in 3G or 4.5G. It simply wasn't designed around that. And so the evolutionary part is that things that we could not have dreamt about doing, like completely wirelessly enabling a factory and retooling on the basis of, okay, it doesn't matter where you are, it'll still be connected. That's a fundamental change. All the way to the other end with ultra-low power and ultra-low latency, where you've got devices that can be embedded, that run for 10 years on a battery, that basically are capable of gathering and sending very small amounts of data, but very critically important. And all of the capabilities in between, for example, things like variable bit rates and variable bandwidth on demand, through capabilities in 5G like network slicing, the ability to actually partition the network down to what individual classes of users and users want, as opposed to it's pretty much one size fits all, we'll just sell you some tonnage. That's the evolutionary part about it. There's lots of use cases going on at the moment. They're all fairly early, fairly nascent. We shouldn't get wrapped up around the wheel of the speed thing, because frankly, as was said, it's not as if we haven't done fixed wireless for a long time. This just adds some new capabilities, plus hopefully doing it at a lower cost, which can actually meet customers' demand. Because if we don't do that, this is going to be a very, very long and drawn-out process.
Right. And Sean, I imagine from the security point of view, 5G has some revolutionary aspects, or at least some challenges from a security perspective.
Yeah, and I think one of the key things that we've picked up on as a company that's used to defending the front end of provider networks, being on the sort of transient and peering connections, is the change in the topology of the network with respect to the move to 5G and many of the things that was just said. And I think it came up in the first keynote yesterday from Red Hat, talking about where's the edge gone when you get a full rollout of 5G. Excuse me. And one of the key things we've picked up is things like the notion of edge compute and edge clouds to support some of these ultra-low latency applications where you're needing to do some really fast processing of data right on the edge of the network to actually benefit from those applications that are then using 5G to get their connection. From our perspective, that's as a security company, that's another whole area where the threat landscape is kind of changing, or the threat surface, is changing to the point where you've now got to consider what happens if that gets compromised. And from a denial of service protection perspective, what we specialize in, you can see that there are potential huge vulnerabilities there. If an attack that used to just fill up your core network can now go down and disrupt those vital processing capabilities that are in that distributed cloud that's going to exist once 5G matures, then there's some serious risk there, and there's some considerations that need to be made as to how you're going to make sure that stays safe, protected, and operational in the face of someone who wants to disrupt that.
Okay, well, I think we'll come back to that a bit more. And I'm actually going to just pivot a little bit.
I really want to go into this.
Yeah.
So I think fundamentally, one of the things we're struggling with is 5G isn't really one thing. It's many things. When we think about a revolution, there isn't usually in history just one revolution. Often there's a range of revolutions. We're on the 30th anniversary of the Polish Revolution, the Eastern European revolutions. You go back to 1848. When you have one revolution, you often have many. And I think we'll see this with 5G. And I think we're all revolutionaries. And I think some of the revolutions are actually happening right now in the early phase of 5G. Because what's happening is there's a massive spectrum grab. We've got many new bands being allocated to cellular that weren't previously used. We've got millimeter wave, which if you talk to the device makers, it's revolutionary to try and do that with a mobile type device. You went back 3 or 4 years, you'd think that was a fixed wireless solution exclusively. That's revolutionary if you're a chipset company, if you're a company looking at bandwidth for mobility. If you look at some of the other frequency bands that are being looked at, there is this massive debate, and we've got, I think, the conference end of this year about spectrum allocations for the next few years. And there's a tremendous debate where incumbent holders and users of spectrum are being kind of edged out, whether you're satellite base station use on C-band, whether you're terrestrial TV on the kind of sub-1 gigahertz bands. the mobile industry is edging out other use of spectrum because mobility is such a high profile, such a high important thing for consumers, and it's very, very profitable. And that's revolutionary if you're in one of those other sectors that are being edged out. And that's happening now. That's not happening in 3 or 4 years' time when you have a 5G core. And then these new use cases are also potential revolutions. We're revolutionaries, but those revolutions haven't happened yet. So I think 5G will have many revolutionary elements to it, and some of them are actually happening right now on some of these spectrum band uses and some of these debates on, what the implication is of cellular on that band for this existing holder.
Well, thanks for that. And you make a good point. 5G is not just one thing, and yet you'll hear or read articles and people say 5G's rolled out and people are disappointed in it, and we still don't have all the standards set. We don't have all the spectrum allocated, as you said. So I'd like to discuss a bit about how should people think about the status of 5G as it is today. We see a lot of announcements around the world about 5G deployments. What really are those? And then maybe we can bring it back a bit to Canada. And how is Canada positioned for 5G? I mean, I think Alexander mentioned that 4G is a necessary and good platform or takeoff for 5G. And I know, Ian, your company's looked at how companies are faring in 4G and ready for 5G, and so we can come back to that. But maybe open to anyone who wants to start, but just how should people think about the status of 5G now?
Well, I'll jump in. So I think I just alluded to that a second ago, is if you look at the current mobile broadband deployments, they're using different buckets of spectrum. In the States, AT&T and Verizon using millimeter wave, which is incredibly high capacity, incredibly fast, but incredibly difficult to predict what the coverage will be. Doesn't penetrate indoors. It's a very different experience to, say, the 3.5 gigahertz spectrum being deployed in UK, or Australia, or Switzerland, or Korea, which gives you a high-speed experience, but in a much more conventional mobile type kind of dynamic. And then you've got what Sprint's doing Sprint and T-Mobile, I think, are doing in the US, and I think 2 of the carriers here have just acquired 600 megahertz spectrum, which is a very low-band spectrum, very good for coverage, but will enable those carriers to say they have very wide 5G availability, but maybe won't have the same capacity to offer higher speeds. So I think there's almost these 3 buckets. There's the very high millimeter wave band services. There's the kind of bread and butter of 5G, which are the mid-band, high-capacity, high-speed bands, which haven't previously been used. Then there's these low bands and reuse of 4G bands. And you can almost look at the current mobile broadband services in these 3 buckets, and you can see the real-world speeds that users are having varies a lot depending on what type of service, what spectrum bands being deployed.
So I again, agree with all of that. I think 5G in Canada is going to be different than 5G in the US. It's going to be different than 5G in Europe. Because 5G is going to be country specific. And so it won't evolve in the same way here that it does south of the border. I think the most important thing about 5G in Canada is that it's about the country, not individual companies, and about how it gets deployed. It's really important that this country realize that it is a question of everybody pulling together to have the best 5G services in this country, to get the spectrum out there, to get the infrastructure built, which involves partnerships with universities, which we've started to do, and you'll hear a bit later on from Gail Murphy at UBC, industry, municipalities, the government, etc. So it all has to come together. It's not just about a spectrum. It's not just about infrastructure. In terms of the deployments, I agree. It's all of the bands. One of the things about 5G is it's agnostic. It will grow into all the bands over time. So all the bands that exist today that are being used for 3G and 4G will be 5G bands. They're coming in the not too distant future. And so everything from 600, 700, 850 megahertz today, which are the 3 low bands that are available, those are the solid foundation for 5G in exactly the same way as they were a solid foundation for their predecessors. Why? Because Canada's a very large country. We don't have that many people. We need to do coverage, and we need to get inside buildings in the same way. Every day, customers are served by low-band networks. because of the very nature of this country. So depending on whether you're dense urban, suburban, and rural, that percentage varies, but everybody's on it every day. And so the bottom line is low-band spectrum has absolutely just as much a place in 5G as it did in its predecessors, and a solid foundation builds a solid network. The mid-band networks, again, the ones that exist today at 1900, 2100, 2500, are all going to become 5G band. They're all heading that way. 3500 that was mentioned, that's the Goldilocks band. It's not too hot, not too cold. You can bolt it onto existing grids today on mid-band networks of 1921 and 2600. There's a lot more spectrum coming. There's, in theory, up to about 900 megahertz in that band. And it does have a great propagation in the sense that it's not very, limited to a few hundred meters. And yes, if you actually can, with some of the new technologies in 5G like MIMO, massive MIMO and the like, and beamforming, it actually penetrates buildings actually quite well. I don't know, some of you may have been at the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona. Vodafone was showing its deployment of 3.5 with beamforming and massive MIMO. It was penetrating into buildings extremely well, actually.
I think we're going to see that in the real world, because it's a Goldilocks band for 5G, but I think for, say, 4G, probably 1900, 1800 is probably Goldilocks, probably.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing is the reason it's the Goldilocks band for 5G is because it's high capacity, it's new spectrum, you can do very fast services, and if the vendors are right, and the promise of massive MIMO and smart antenna technologies can deliver good indoor coverage, then it really is. But I think my view is that we'll have to see whether that plays out in the real world. When you've got different kinds of buildings and many users, we'll have to see whether it really works quite as well as the vendors promise.
Just to close off on that, we agree, but that's why 5G will just be just as much of a hierarchical network as 4G was. In other words, a series of bands that come together to fulfill customers' requirements, be they consumers or be they businesses or government. And the last one, in terms of your comments on millimetric wave, agreed. 24, 26, 28, 38 gigahertz, they're all getting up there. Huge amounts of bandwidth coming, gigahertz worth of bandwidth, but they're tough to deploy. They're near line of sight, if not line of sight, and frankly, with population densities that we have in Canada, they're not going to be ubiquitous anytime soon. And so that's why that confluence of existing bands and 3.5 will be incredibly important in this country.
Yeah, so I would agree with most of the comments that have been made, but I think that there are some common band strategies that will emerge for 5G worldwide. And I mean, nothing that wasn't said already. So we think that the extremely lower bands are probably going to be used for devices, for your IoT devices, because IoT devices require very good coverage. So you want to ensure good coverage. So the 600 megahertz, the 700 megahertz, those types of bands will become IoT bands. It's low data rates, high coverage. The 3.5 that you discussed is going to be more people band, so it's going to be for a lot of consumer applications. It's going to be the mainstream band. And I think the 3.5 is where it's been demonstrated that with massive MIMO you can get good indoor coverage, but you cannot do that with millimeter wave. So millimeter wave with massive MIMO couldn't get you indoor coverage. So coming to millimeter wave, that band is a very special band, so because it's very difficult to plan with millimeter wave. And what we've seen happen with millimeter wave, or other than some of the fixed wireless use cases, we've seen a lot of venues being deployed. Now there's a movement to deploy venues like stadiums, et cetera, because that's where you need the heavy amount of capacity. And with beamforming, you can really take advantage of the throughput that millimeter wave offers. In fact, you have some TCO advantages because you may not have to deploy as many antenna points as because of the beamforming. You may deploy fewer locations of radios and be able to cover an entire stadium compared to where many of the operators are deploying huge amounts of radios in stadiums for 4G today because there's a capacity issue. with 4G. So that's where we're seeing a sweet spot emerge for millimeter wave in that arena, but it's not something that you're going to see everywhere. It's going to be very, very selected pockets.
So, we've heard that there's an evolution which will lead to revolutionary capabilities and uses, and we've heard that it will not all happen at once, and it will happen differently in different countries and different stages. So if we can look at Canada a bit, again, going back to where we are, we still have standards in development. We still have equipment being developed to meet standards as they come out. We still have spectrum that needs to be allocated. To Canadians, when people talk about 5G and when is it coming, when will it be here, as if it is one thing, how should we really think about how 5G will be deployed in Canada, if we crystal ball it a bit?
Well, I think one thing which kind of relates to that is that when you look at Canada today and you compare it with other countries, in our recent study of 87 countries globally, the download speed experience on average in Canada ranked 3rd globally, with speeds of 42.5 megabits, which is almost double the speeds that US consumers have. It's up there with places like Corero, which is a little bit faster.
And no one believes that, by the way.
But the interesting thing is, and we've had this at this event too, this whole debate about, well, what about other things that matter for the customer experience? And the interesting thing about 5G is these new bands are adding a lot more capacity for the cellular networks. So it isn't just about offering higher speed. That higher capacity opens opportunities for the carriers to design their tariffs differently, potentially. It may be that the speed increase isn't what matters most to Canadians. It might be the capacity increase, and what that enables for the tariffing might be the thing that really drives consumers to demand 5G early. And put pressure on to get these spectrum auctions done, and then the networks deployed as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, we do as an association focus groups on different things, and whenever we tell people where our networks rank in terms of speeds or consistencies and comparing them to other G7 countries, we just get a lot of people say, no, that's not true. That's not true. So it's interesting. We were very humble as Canadians, but it's something I think we should brag about, especially when you think about the size of our country, the climate, and all those types of things. So just going back to the question of how do we envision 5G in Canada, any other thoughts? Sean, do you want to say?
I thought it was interesting that concept of getting the right choice of bands for the right location. It's a very different scale, but where I live in sort of central southern England, but it's very rural. It doesn't compare to the distances that you have in Canada to deal with between communities. But I live in a small village with 300 houses, ironically only 20 miles away from Vodafone's headquarters, and I struggle to get 4G coverage there, and depending on what the weather's like or whatever. But when 5G rolls out, it's a rural area. We don't want to have antennas everywhere. So I guess the equation of using small, the higher density bands means you're going to have more towers, more interruption of the kind of rural view. I think it's people are happy to make a trade-off then between the ultimate capacity they have and what it means for their environment. So I can see that it just in my little bit of England, that makes a big difference. I can see that from a Canadian perspective, that's even on a bigger scale.
So again, I would reinforce that. Rogers' strategy has not been focused on peak speed. The reality is, we are there to provide a service to meet people's real-world requirements, basis of average speed that they can do what they want, customers can do what they want to do on mobile devices or fixed devices inside buildings or combinations thereof. The idea behind 5G is, and frankly, some of the developments also in 4.5G in LTE Advanced, with getting into 4x4 MIMO. They're all about increasing range and capacity for people today, as well as building for the future on tomorrow. our intentions are to use 5G, some of the capabilities, because it allows you to aggregate more bands together. It allows you to aggregate them in a combination of 4.5G and 5G, and it breaks some of the limitations that 4.5G has. We've reached the edge of what we can do in terms of carrier aggregation today. We're going to have 5G single band and then multiple bands of 5G aggregated with 4G, and 3GPP specifications, even on 4G, will allow us to expand the number of bands that get aggregated. It's not just about peak speed, it's very much about real world demand increasing and making sure that we can fulfill customers' requirements, whatever they want to do. We don't invent what they want to do, but our job is all about making sure that they can do it over a wireless network. And the combination of 4.5G and 5G enables that. Chasing the peak speed thing is, it's very nice, but the practical reality is that's not what people are looking for every day.
So, and on that point, again, just in reading some of the articles I read coming into this about, 5G evolution or revolution, there's some about the 5G myth and all these things. And Alexander talked about it's all about the customer experience. Some people claim that, 5G is just a luxury. We don't really need it. Some even say it's a conspiracy by equipment vendors who just want to sell new stuff. So what happens if we don't do 5G? Or what happens if we push it off? Whether it's the customer experience, whether it's a nation's economy. I know, Nokia, your colleague earlier was talking about productivity. So what really happens if we don't embrace 5G?
So I work with some operators globally, right? In their countries, spectrum auctions are delayed indefinitely, right? They don't have a date for when 5G spectrum is going to go out. So what, in the short term, what you can do as an operator is, you can figure out how to breathe new life into 4G. And there are many ways to do that. You can start deploying more of the LTE advanced features. So I think when speed is an issue, it can be managed to some extent, right, for some time, because what you cannot provide is spectrum. So 5G not only brings new technology, but also new spectrum. And spectrum cannot be produced. It's a limited good, right? So that cannot. So 4G can have a lot more, additional technology can be used to extend the life of networks. However, what 5G does enable is the industrial use cases, right? And to the extent that you think that the fourth industrial revolution is coming, right? How close is it? So if you think it's very far away, then you can decide, let's say, to wait it out. But it's a dangerous strategy, because now by waiting out the fourth industrial revolution, you are, not allowing others to take advantage of the ecosystem. Because what's going to happen is, if the ecosystem is there, then there will be entities that would take advantage of the ecosystem and start to build technologies and that would ultimately help productivity, like what Stephen talked about earlier today. So that's the productivity. You may eventually, if you push it out too much, you may run the risk of lowering productivity compared to other countries, and that's a pretty big risk to take. And that's why none of the regulators are wanting to take that risk, and they're going ahead with auctions, right, in most G7 countries for that reason.
Yeah, go ahead, Alexander.
So the 5G is coming. The capability is going to manifest itself in new bands and in existing bands. It is going to provide more efficiency. It is going to provide the capability of running it in both 4G and 5G at the same time. So it is going to provide new capabilities for IoT, massive IoT, as opposed to its predecessors. It's going to evolve into this thing. As was said earlier, you can, through an evolution of existing cores, add 5G functionality without having to press the reset button on everything. You can evolve your existing network into 5G. You can start with data. You don't have to start with voice. You can add data capabilities and then graduate into adding voice and adding next generation of IoT services. It is an evolution in that regard.
It's not going to arrive all at the same time, but it's going to arrive. And those capabilities will show up.
So I think that's right. I think it's going to happen. Even if there's no new spectrum, the Canadian carriers will do what they can with their current spectrum holdings to push the envelope.
We're doing it.
Yeah, exactly. The problem is, without that new spectrum, you don't get the big capacity improvements to keep pace with industry and consumers' demand for mobile data over wireless networks, which puts pressure on speeds, means there'll be more situations where people will not have a good enough speed to do what they want to do. And that I think is the bigger risk. Because if you look at the difference between, say, 2G and 3G technologies or 3G and 4G, there was quite a big jump in the efficiency of how those technologies could use the amount of radio spectrum they were on. With 5G, it's a more modest increment. So if you just deploy 5G on the current bands, you don't get this massive jump capacity. You need the new spectrum bands to do that. So I think your question is not whether 5G happens sooner, it's whether the new spectrum bands needed, the mid-band, the millimeter wave, particularly that mid-band, the Goldilocks band, whether that's available to Canadian carriers sooner rather than later on terms that help them invest efficiently to drive the Canadian economy.
I think we may hear something about that tomorrow when Minister Baines is here. So
I'd just like to add one thing, which is I think it's really important to put where we are and where we're heading in context. I mean, there are no magic beans in radio physics. You can do all manner of very clever things with beamforming and massive MIMO, but you're still limited. Where we're heading on 5G, and it was designed around this, is huge amounts of bandwidth. I mean, the industry, not just in Canada, but around the world, the wireless industry, has survived on a few hundred megahertz worth of spectrum for the past 30 years. We're going to be heading into hundreds and hundreds of megahertz worth of spectrum arriving in the next 5 years. The 28 gig band alone, 800 megahertz in one shot. Verizon is running around, and it made its bets, and hats off to them that they did this. But they're bringing huge amounts of spectrum to bear to make this happen. And so it is a combination of new technology, but it's also a combination of new spectrum for new applications. Things that we could not have envisaged doing over wireline networks now can be possible on wireless networks for customers to decide how they're going to use them at the edge, inside a building, in the wide area. But it is driven by a huge amount of spectrum coming on stream to change the nature of the market.
I think what will also happen for consumers and smartphone users is that if Canada doesn't push forward with allocating this new capacity to enable speeds to keep up with the global averages, the risk is other countries will deploy the fast, high-capacity networks. The tech companies, media companies will build services that require those very high-speed, very high-capacity networks, and they'll target those other countries. And Canadians will look around and go, why can't we do that? Why can't we do the thing that the Koreans are doing, or the US or the British people are doing on their high-speed 5G networks? And then everyone would be going, we have to catch up, which is a really nasty position to be in, because investments in telecom infrastructure don't happen super quickly. They take months, if not years, to roll out those networks. And that's the real risk, I think. The applications that people might build for 5G might be targeted at other countries, and Canadians are left behind.
Yeah, that's why I said earlier that it's about countries, not companies.
yeah, and I think, again, a lot of well, not a lot, but when we get pushback as an association when we're talking about 5G, is again, people say, well, these highfalutin use cases you're talking about, I don't need those things. They're not important. But to us, and I think Anoop alluded to it, and Nokia's talked about it a lot in terms of the productivity gains, how it's important to a nation's economy. And we've shameless plug for CWTA. We commissioned a report from Accenture last year that looked at the economic impact of 5G to Canada, and they projected a $40 billion incremental GDP gain by 2026 for Canada. But also said it's going to cost a lot to do. And they said about, not including spectrum costs. We just had a 600 megahertz spectrum. We've got some coming up in the next couple of years. But not including spectrum costs, they estimated, first rollout until about 2020 to 2026, it's going to cost about $26 billion. Some people say, well, is that a good use of our money? And they say, we've heard a lot at this conference about the importance of bridging the digital divide, connecting people who are in underserved areas. And some posit that money should just go to instead trying to connect to Canadians. What's your response to that? Can we do both? Are we doing both? What are the limitations on doing both?
I think absolutely both have to be done because you've got two competing, I guess not competing, but two different things that you have to do. One is you have the industrial machine and you have to power the industrial machine. And the industrial machine is key to the productivity gains and the GDP of the country, right? So you have to keep it powered and you have to make it competitive compared to other countries, right? So that can survive and be the leader. And then the other part is to bring the underserved people into the ecosystem because right now there's a lot of underserved people that are not in the ecosystem. I think one way to do that would be to give some incentives for when you're doing the 5G spectrum, and I know that's an area that I don't necessarily want to get into in terms of it's a policy area, but it is possible to have some incentives for operators to connect consumers who don't have access to broadband. I mean, those things are done in many countries. Those incentives do exist where certain companies are given grants to provide connectivity in certain rural grants, things like that. So I don't think they're competing with each other. They could be done together.
Alexander, maybe from a Rogers perspective?
So I agree with those statements. I mean, and the Canadian government is trying to encourage and fund rural broadband and increases in capability. However, it's at the end of the day, you need spectrum to be able to do that, and it gets very expensive, and so that cost needs to be built in. Broadband requires the capability to aggregate multiple blocks, and so that was one of our primary reasons for acquiring additional 600 megahertz spectrum, because we can see what the future is in terms of the ability to aggregate multiple low-band networks together to fulfill the requirements of people in dense urban, suburban, and rural. But it's not as if it's relegated to industries or consumers. It's both. And our investments are designed around that from the outset.
I'm going to say something radical, I think, as a mobile guy, and maybe some of the people in the room who look more broadly at the telecom landscape may disagree, but when I look at wireless, one of the advantages of wireless is it supports the device that consumers care about most today, which is the smartphone. And we've seen a transition in the last 15 years, really enabled by 3G and 4G, where people now use the smartphone as their primary device for living a life and connecting with services and retail and communicating everything else, not a PC. We also look around and you see, if you want to support high-speed broadband in a community which doesn't currently have good enough fixed infrastructure, it's extremely expensive and difficult and time-consuming to lay new fiber to different geographies and go through planning and all the rest. It's much quicker, usually, to deploy wireless technologies. So I think there's two things here. There is, how do you support the needs of all Canadians, not just those Canadians that are currently well served? And then, how do you do that? And I would say wireless technology is usually the most straightforward, quickest, and efficient way of supporting those communities and those individuals, not laying large amounts of fiber.
I completely agree. I mean, it's, adding additional wireless spectrum onto a network is by far the most efficient way to add capacity as opposed to trying to extend networks. It takes a long time, to your point of earlier. And the economics of wireless get more compelling with each successive generation. The whole point of 5G is to capitalize on being able to use all the spectrum and provide services, as opposed to trying to individual radio channels and trying to aggregate them in very small chunks of spectrum. It's a very different environment that we'll be in on 5G, which will change the landscape all the way from the downtown cores all the way out to the edge of the network.
So we do want to welcome questions from the floor. So if anyone does have a question, please just go up to one of the mics. It's a little bit hard to see, but I think I've got a question at number 4.
Yes, hi.
If you could just give us your name and who you're affiliated with.
Yeah, my name is Elgis Aksnas. I'm from Mobile, Smart Tiny Telecom. My questions will be about Canada and adoption and cost per megabyte and which customers will benefit the most from 5G. So considering the fact that 51% of Canadians are on 2 gigabyte plan or less, that's December data, CRTC, do you see any issues with 5G adoption going forward? That's question number 1. Also, I have a question to Roger's representative about the cost of producing the megabyte in the 5G world. What's the range are we talking? We have a unique insight in Canada about the cost per megabyte due to a wholesale proceeding last year, and Roger's cost, I believe, is about 1.3 or about 1 cent per megabyte. Where it will go, after 5G deployment. And also one comment, or maybe comment about the third place in the world. Isn't it a case of empty highway if the average usage in Canada is 2.2 gigabytes per user with the current LTE advanced networks that reach 1 Gbps speeds? If we would have, comparable usage, will it go down? That's maybe for Opensignal representative to answer. Thank you.
So there's 3 questions there, I think.
I can take the one. I can take the one about the empty highway. It's
Yeah.
the last question.
Yeah.
So I think that, again, this is a perspective, right? What we have seen is regarding these the data caps. Many times that artificially, induces you not to use data, and the moment those are removed, then customers end up using up a lot more capacity than they had on their data plan. So I absolutely believe that those numbers that, if you have such data caps, and if you think that, if you look at a lot of other countries, right, they're using way more data than that. And I think there's simply no reason why it would be that low. I think that if the plans are changed and the technology is there, I think the usage will be there. But that's a perspective. I don't have any hard evidence to base that on.
So, the current average usage we know is going to increase. There's no chance that customer demand is not going to increase over the next several years. It was mentioned earlier that the smartphone is now the most important communications tool. We agree. And so the challenge in this country is building for that capacity on the basis of population density and areas to be covered and the economics of doing so. We hope 5G will be much more cost efficient on a cost per bit carried, both in terms of the ability to aggregate bands and the ability to use new bands, and the capabilities in terms of modulation and things like massive MIMO to reduce the costs of actually carrying a bit across the network and allowing capacity and speeds and capability to increase. We know it's inevitable. We have to build for it, which is why Rogers has spent the last 2 years on a massive upgrade program, uplift program, of its entire network, coast to coast, replacing every single radio with 4.5G, 5G capable radios with a minimum of 4x4 MIMO, and moving to massive MIMO and millimetric wave when they arrive. So we know it's going to happen. It's a question of building for the future We can see the writing on the wall in terms of other countries, as was just mentioned. And we know what those stats are. Basically, it's building, and as was also said, it takes a while to do this and to make the economics work across the entirety of this country. In terms of the individual cost per bit carried, I think you've seen our filings. I don't think we're going to basically be able to have a spirited debate on what the individual cost per bit carried will be on 5G, but it has to be better than that. It has to be a 10x, type of, decrease in costs. Otherwise, we're all going to be in a lot of trouble trying to meet customer demand. But it's also really, really important to realize that the cost of the network is multifaceted. The cost of radios and the cost of the radio equipment is maybe 20% of the total cost of building a network. The really heavy lifting in building any wireless network is backhaul, which is very expensive to build in this country, and getting facilities and sites, which are, laying concrete and putting up steel is very expensive. If you want to make money in wireless, I suggest you have a go at that, because it's a great business to be in. But the bottom line is, it's more than just the technology that will have to come to bear. It's about access to facilities, access to infrastructure, and getting Canadians to work together to develop the best wireless services in North America and worldwide.
I wanted to, in the last time we have about 11 minutes left, just talk a little bit some of the biggest challenges to bringing 5G to Canada and elsewhere. And some of the common ones we hear about are things like access to infrastructure for deployment. Security obviously is a challenge to get that right. Spectrum, we've talked a lot about that already, so we don't really need to go into that. As well, we've heard about the massive amount of investment that's going to be required, and we've heard other speakers talk about having a regulatory environment that encourages investment. So if any of you want to talk about any of those, or if you have any other ideas that you want to present to the audience about some of the biggest challenges.
I'll just pick up on the point about the backhaul piece, because I think that's very striking. Is this is, I think, the second largest country in the world. In our data, Canada ranks, I think, 18th out of 87 countries for the measure of 4G availability, which is the time that consumers spend connected to 4G, which is an incredibly good measure. I think the backhaul piece is particularly challenging because you have a difficult climate in the winter months here, which means any equipment in the field's got to be very robust. You've got probably using a lot of wireless microwave-type backhaul links. One of the things that's interesting, we haven't talked about earlier, is that this whole 5G innovation isn't just about the radio, it's right the way through the network. There's innovation happening. It's an end-to-end change in network architecture. And I've been at events where Nokia and Nokia's competitors have been talking about the moves to improve the microwave links, the capacity of those, which isn't sexy. It's about one of the most unsexy things in the mobile industry, but it enables the front end, the radio network that the smartphone connects to support a higher speed throughput if that backhaul connection is high capacity. And there are improvements really right the way through the network architecture, which should help deployments in Canada.
Thanks very much for that. So again, just in terms of some of the other challenges, we mentioned our geography is one for sure, but Alexander?
One of the largest ones, if not the largest one, is 5G is as much about real estate as it is about technology. When you get into millimetric wave spectrum, the number of sites rises, orders of magnitude by comparison with existing networks today, simply because of the propagation of those frequencies. You're going to have a lot more small cells, a lot more sites to be connected, a lot more sites to be integrated. So finding that real estate, getting access to it, working with municipalities, working with local, regional, provincial governments is key to all of this. It's a long-term process. It doesn't happen overnight. It requires multiple years of planning to get there. You know, many of these frequencies are not going to arrive, but you need to be ready for them to arrive. And so, frankly, it's real estate and planning, and getting, you know, making sure that the comment that was made about backhaul, the combinations of fiber and microwave are going to be around for a long time. You can do things with high-capacity microwave that were unheard of just a few years ago. 10 gigabits per second, 20 gigabits per second. We're heading to even double that. So, you know, combinations of those technology. But it is about real estate in one form or another. You know, to be able to make this happen, it's simply by the amount of radio devices that will be out there in the network in a hierarchical structure.
I think there's a risk also of kind of unintended consequences sometimes. You know, in Canada, I hear very few people here complain about the quality of the mobile networks. You travel the world, you hear that issue a lot. You hear people complain about their video being throttled, which is why at Opensignal we run an active video test. We stream a video file to the device and see whether it works or not, because carriers in many markets market unlimited plans and they throttle the video. They treat it differently. Other carriers around the world will, if you hit your data cap, they throttle the speeds right down to barely usable speeds. Others let their network get saturated with data, which means the average speeds look okay, but actually when you want to use the network at a busy time in the evening, you can't do anything, and it barely works. So, you know, you've got to make sure that all the detail from the operational planning side, the minutiae of how the spectrum is packaged up for auction or allocated, everything has to fit together. And if you get it wrong, you'll get one of these nasty outcomes if you're not careful. You've got to be very careful not to have an unintended consequence from a very well-intentioned decision about some part of the setup.
Okay. Just a reminder, if you have a question, please just step up to the mic. We've got about just over 5 minutes left. I think we have a question here at 2. Go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, you touched on security. And what are we going to have to do to secure what is inherently a not particularly secure medium? A wire, at least you know where it's going, and yeah, it can be tapped, but it's not as easy intercepting radio waves and having man-in-the-middle attacks and all sorts of fun things. How is security keeping up?
No, thanks for the question. I mean, I'll go to you, Sean, but before you answer, I mean, one thing I know we run across in the association is a lot of people think that security is a new issue for wireless with 5G. It's always, I think, been at the forefront. But how is 5G changing that? How are service providers such as yourself providing security services reacting to the changes in network architecture, et cetera?
I mean, I guess there's two sides of security. One is the privacy, so it's whether there's potential for interception, so encryption technologies. There's improvements coming in encryption with quantum techniques that are coming to kind of keep the techniques we use today secure in the future. So that kind of keeps the data that's being transported secure. We do security from a DDoS protection perspective, which is about disruption. Being able to disrupt a wireless signal, that's a different prospect, I guess. Being able to jam signals if you want to do that, that's another thing altogether. So I don't know. I think it's me as a networking kind of security guy. It's hard to kind of say what you'd actually overlay on a 5G network that you weren't already doing with an existing mobile network, or that you weren't already doing effectively.
I think there's another piece here, which is that if you're a smartphone user and you're at home or you're in a public place like here and you connect to Wi-Fi, it may be technically a wired network, but you actually got this kind of Wi-Fi link, which is not entirely great always. So I don't think it's as black and white as saying wired versus wireless. I think everything now kind of blends together. You have a mixture of technologies used often.
Okay, thanks. I guess my last question is, and we probably don't have time to cover it all, but just it comes up as well as, in the 4G world, for example, network providers spent billions and billions of dollars building these great networks. They're recouping their investments, et cetera. But we have over-the-top players who are, basically using those networks to make billions and become the richest companies in the world. What's it going to be like for 5G for network providers? Are they again just going to be that? Go ahead.
So I think it gives a chance for network providers to really be more of a player compared to what happened in the 4G arena. Because in the 4G arena, what happened is many of the networks were built by the network providers, and as you mentioned, the Googles of the world, or a lot of the traffic on the internet is just Google search. So you have this kind of paradigm, right? Now, what happens with 5G is that there is in my opinion, a difference between the consumer use cases and the industrial use cases or the vertical use cases. So in the consumer use cases, it may be similar in some, we talked about, it may be kind of evolutionary. So what happened in 4G may just extend into the consumer use cases, although there's opportunities for network providers to align with, let's say, gaming providers and provide a gaming package, or there are things like that could be done, or for example, fixed wireless, very much owned by the network providers, right? So there is that opportunity, but still there is a distinct possibility that what could happen in 4G would extend. Now it changes when it comes to the vertical markets, because now in the vertical markets, it's more difficult for the over-the-top players to kind of, because it's very connected to the network. So if you're going to be servicing a factory, you have to build a special network for the factory, and that's not something an over-the-top player could do. Now, the conversely, what needs to happen though is that the network providers would need to also focus on the vertical use case more than they have been in the past, because in the past the business has been more consumer-centric, and it's been about, okay, it's only been consumer-centric. And there's been differences in network providers. Some are more focused on the vertical market than others, but some network providers are purely focused on the consumer market, right? Now, it's very difficult for someone who's purely focused on the consumer market to make a pivot and say, now I'm going to be starting to work with warehouses, because it's an entirely new ecosystem. You got to work with the warehouse players, or you got to understand who the players are in the ecosystem and come up with a arrangement. So I think that part, it's not that the threat of over-the-top players goes away, but it also more work has to be done to cultivate that ecosystem and build solutions that are specific to that vertical.
More
in my opinion.
collaboration. Yeah. Okay. Oh, Alexander, go ahead. We have 30 seconds left. So
I agree, but I want to slightly modify that from an operator's perspective. Trying to be experts at all verticals is a tough proposition. One of the things that is different in 5G than in 4G is that there's a set of capabilities that are horizontal that you can build on to serve vertical industries. And it's really a function of, for consumers or the enterprise market in all of its various forms, to be good at those horizontal capabilities and stack them in such a way that it's the 80-20 rule. The 20% that is absolutely specialized will be specialized. Most of the capabilities actually are inherent in multiple industries. So at least our intent and strategy is to be good on those verticals, on those horizontal stackings.
I'll just say one last comment on this, which is revolutions are inherently unpredictable. The people that start the revolution don't always end up in power. And when you look at this revolution that we're starting in the mobile industry for 5G, some of these things are uncertain. Those technology companies that disrupted the industry over the last 10, 15 years, they're still looking at it. They're still angling. What's the in for us in the 5G era?
Absolutely.
Then you've got industrial verticals. Some of those guys are looking at this going, actually, we'd like to do this ourselves. We can cut out the middleman. And you can see that in Germany, where they're talking to the regulator directly and saying, well, actually, we'd like to run a 5G network and get spectrum. So it's inherently unpredictable, but it means that the telecom industry needs to get this right now.
Okay. Thanks very much. That was a great discussion. I just want to, again, thanks our panelists. We'll give a round of applause to our panelists. Thanks very much. Thank you.